Joining me now, the president's national security advisor, John Bolton, in his first interview since meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin this week in Moscow. Ambassador Bolton, welcome back to Fox News Sunday.
Glad to be with you.
What does President Trump want from his summit with Putin? Is it beyond just improving the dialogue and general relations? Does he realistically hope for any breakthroughs on Ukraine or Syria or arms control?
Well, I think the first point is that it's very important to have this bilateral meeting, not on the margins of a larger meeting like the G20, as he's been able to do before, but to have a conversation with Vladimir Putin that covers the full range of issues. I expect it'll be somewhat unstructured, certainly in their one-on-one meeting, but it'll give them a chance to go over some of these issues free of the pressure of immediate deadlines or crises. And I think in establishing that line of communication, the president has very much in mind. He wants to understand the Russian position, and perhaps more importantly, he wants Vladimir Putin to understand our positions. Now, if breakthroughs come from that, that'll be great, but frankly, having this meeting roughly a year and a half into the administration is a key fact.
After the Singapore summit, here's what President Trump told our colleague Bret Baier about what he thought might be able to happen if he could sit down with Vladimir Putin.
I could say, would you do me a favor? Would you get out of Syria? Would you do me a favor? Would you get out of the Ukraine?
Does President Trump really think it's going to be that easy to sway Vladimir Putin? Will you do me a favor?
No, I think what he's saying is, look, if we can have a direct conversation between the two leaders, especially given the Russian system where Putin essentially calls the shot, we can find out where Russia's main points of what its main objectives are and what we need to achieve. But without this kind of discussion, which has been precluded for some time by the political noise over the allegations of collusion with the campaign, we haven't been able to do that. So that's why having the meeting and getting started is in and of itself so important.
Some European leaders have come out this week and said that they're worried that we're going to see a repeat of what happened with the G7 summit in Canada and then the president's trip to Singapore, that he will meet with our NATO allies in Europe and be very critical of them, and then he will go to Helsinki and meet with President Putin and and lavish praise on him. In Canada, the president reportedly said that NATO is as bad as NAFTA.
Well, look, I was there in Canada. I didn't hear that remark. I'm not aware that he said it. I think there are a lot of stories that grow with the telling. But let's be clear, the NATO summit is an important meeting. I think the president has made clear to all European leaders he's met with that NATO is an important alliance for the United States, our most important. He just has a very precise idea that the NATO allies should live up to the commitment they themselves made to spend 2% of their budget on 2% of the gross national product on defense spending.
But I think the point is that he seemed to be tougher on our allies at the G7 than he was on an adversary like him, and the concern among European leaders is if he does that same thing and is critical of NATO and then goes and praises Putin, that it weakens NATO vis-a-vis Russia.
Yeah. Well, I don't read the way he conducted these meetings the same way. And I don't think anybody ought to have a case of the vapors over the discussions we have in NATO or the G7 versus discussions with Putin and Kim Jong-un. They're very, very different. The president treats them differently. He understands what the strategic interests are, and that's what he's trying to pursue.
But let's look at some of the statements that President Trump has made with regard to Russia recently, and I want to put them up on the screen. He said that Russia should be invited back into the G7. In Canada, he reportedly told the other leaders Crimea, which Putin, of course, seized, is Russian because everyone who lives there speaks Russian. This week, he tweeted, Russia continues to say they had nothing to do with meddling in our election, and the Pentagon is reportedly studying pulling troops out of Germany. So the question is the president making concessions to Putin before the two men even sit down?
No, I don't think that's the case at all. And that long list of things you just read, it's really an interesting catalog. Some things are true, some things are not true, some things are partially true. I don't think we have enough time for me to go through and parse each and every one of them. I think, though, it goes back to the main rationale to have a bilateral meeting between President Trump and President Putin. Let them discuss these issues and see exactly where there might be room for progress or where we find there's no room at all. In my meeting with President Putin, he was very kind to go through the whole list of items on his agenda. I think there were some where it was clear our position was very, very far apart. There were others where perhaps there's room for some kind of progress. We'll just have to see. But given the nature of the Russian system in particular, I don't think we're going to find out until the two leaders get together.
Well, you say some of the things that we listed, these were all obviously reported. Some of them were clearly true. He did invite...
Lots of things are reported that don't even come close.
I mean, he himself said that he would like to see Russia back in the G7. And
that's the one that's almost unambiguously true, right?
Well, and the tweet is unambiguously true. Did he say at the G7 that Crimea is Russian because everybody there speaks Russian? And the reason I ask that is because between that and inviting Russia back into the G7, there's this argument that's been made that he doesn't want to punish Russia for its bad behavior invading and seizing Crimea.
Right. I didn't hear him say that either, and I didn't see it in the notes. You know, a lot of things come out of these meetings. It did end with some disagreements with the other members. So a lot of this, I think, is potentially exaggerated. I think the key point is that where there are areas of disagreement, certainly with our closest allies, but also with our adversaries, the president's view is he wants to sit down and talk about it.
All right. I want to ask you about one other specific thing on that list, which is that you have been very clear about Russian meddling in 2016. Last year, you called it an act of war, and after Putin denied meddling to President Trump at an economic conference, you said this.
Everybody who has looked at the classified information says there's no doubt the Russians tried to affect the election. Vladimir Putin looked Donald Trump directly in the eye and lied to him. And I think that's the single most important takeaway coming out of this meeting.
Is President Trump, you love it when I play these old clips.
I love watching myself, absolutely.
Is President Trump as clear as you are that, forget the issue of collusion, that Russia meddled in the 2016 election? And if so, why would he retweet their denial this week, at the same time attacking the FBI?
Yeah, I think the president has already said that he's going to raise the question of Russian meddling again with Vladimir Putin. He said it this past week.
Does he believe it happened?
Well, I'll tell you what President Putin said to me, through the translator, of course, that she said there was no meddling in the 2016 election by the Russian state. So I think it still raises the question. I think the president will want to have a conversation about this and say we don't want to see meddling in the 2018 election.
So are you suggesting that maybe, do you have doubts that the Kremlin was involved?
Look, I think the intelligence is what I said it was before. I haven't changed my mind on that, and I think it's something that we're concerned about. That's why the president's going to speak with him about it again.
All right. We haven't had a chance to talk since Singapore, and I'd like to ask you briefly about the North Korean summit. After the summit, President Trump said that North Korea is no longer a nuclear threat to the U.S., but as you well know, there are new reports this weekend that U.S. intelligence has concluded that Kim is trying to conceal the full range of his arsenal and, in fact, has no intention of giving it all up. Have you seen those intelligence reports? Do you believe them? And is Kim playing us?
Well, look, I'm not going to comment on any reports, true, untrue, partially true, about intelligence. There's a good reason why leaking intelligence is a criminal offense in this country. It harms the United States when it happens. It gives away a lot of information to our adversaries. I'll just say this, not answering the specific reports we've seen over the weekend, but I will say this. We are using the full range of our capabilities to understand what North Korea is doing. It doesn't profit the possibility of eliminating North Korea's nuclear weapons to talk on a day-to-day basis. They're doing this, they're not doing this, they're doing the other thing. There's nobody involved in this discussion with North Korea in the administration who is overburdened by naivete. We've seen how the North Koreans have behaved before. The president's been very clear he's not going to make the mistakes of prior administrations. We're going to pursue this, and we'll see what happens. That's, I think, what the next step in the discussions will be.
I want to get two final questions in the time we have left. Back when you worked for Bush 43, you called Kim's father a tyrannical dictator and North Korea a hellish nightmare. And they responded in kind. One of my favorite lines of all time, they called you human scum and a bloodsucker. You called it a badge of honor. Here we can see you sitting at the same table with Kim in Singapore. Was there, and I know you met with him, you shook hands with him, was there any recognition of the fact that you and Pyongyang have history?
You know, they also called me a very ugly fellow, which
I can deny that. That's fake news.
Struck home. But at one point at our lunch, Kim Jong-un said to me, you know, the two of us have to get a picture together. I want to take it home and show my hardliners you're not such a bad guy.
And how did you feel about him saying that?
Wonderful.
Well, it was good for the meeting. Finally, Mexico is voting for president today, and it appears very likely, almost certain, that this man, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, the leftist candidate, will win. He said recently Mexico will not do the United States' dirty work stopping Central American migrants heading north, and he will defend the right of all migrants who need to leave their towns to go and make their life in the U.S. Is AMLO, as he's called, is AMLO going to be trouble for the Trump administration?
Well, honestly, I think people may be surprised on this, and I think President Trump will follow through with the same pattern he's used with other foreign leaders. He'll look forward to meeting with him, sitting down and talking about these things. We have a relatively long transition period between the election and the inauguration of the new Mexican president.
But are you concerned by some of these statements?
I think we're going to get some things done during the transition statement, and I think in this kind of context, having the two leaders get together may produce some surprising results.
Ambassador Bolton, thank you. Always good to talk with you. Please come back, sir.